Hello, welcome to this Hangout on Air, 9:44 a.m. Central Time, Central Daylight Time, May 28th, 2017. Okay, Wolfgang Menzel was a German literary critic, a poet, and a historian. He published a long history of Germany, and he died in 1873. This was written around 1838. They used to have it at the public high school library here. It was called The Story of Nations. It was a bunch of different books: France, Canada, Portugal, Spain, Germany, Japan, China. I read all of them. They were from the 1890s. Leather bound. Each book had a flag, a painted flag of the country on the book. Apparently a very expensive set. And then one day I went to check on it, and the librarian told me that they threw them in the dumpster because nobody besides myself would check them out and read them. Right? So why not throw away dozens of leather-bound history books of all the countries of the world from the 1890s, right? Why keep it? Luckily, I was able to go in there and rescue all the National Geographic magazines that they had, an entire set of from 1923 to the present. You'll see some of these in the background. And then they had the bound National Geographic magazines, 1923 up to today. I read them all. But I read all of the history of nations. And in Menzel's Germany, the history of Germany was very interesting. It was so long they had it in 4 volumes. Now the Canada book, the history of Canada, was in 1 volume. It was an interesting book too, the Canada book, because the author was talking about how the British and the United States had a boundary dispute around the 1890s. Because that book came out in 1895, whatever, and they had a boundary dispute over some islands, and they settled it out of, in a court, like a world court setting. And the author was saying, well, I would have preferred if we had resorted to arbitrament of arms. In other words, he would have preferred if Canada, Great Britain, and Great Britain had fought the United States over those islands. The French was the longest, I think. It was so many volumes. And it was written by the last prime minister of King Louis Philippe of the House of Bourbon Orleans. He was a Protestant prime minister, and they were overthrown in the 1848 revolutions. That was a very interesting book. You can learn a lot by reading these books. Okay, so Menzel's Germany was fantastic. But I noticed one part in here, and I made copies at the school library because I said, what happens if these books disappear one day? Well, certainly they did. And I said, I'd like to have this. So there was a section, I think it was volume 4, but it was really just one big book, but they cut it up into 4 volumes, and it was section 239, excuse me, section 239, The Rise of Prussia. In The Rise of Prussia, the section 239 was called something, I don't remember, the Enlightenment, I think, because section 240 is German influence in Scandinavia and Russia. Okay, so I said I would read this because there's really nowhere else you can get it unless you buy the whole. You can maybe get it on one of these websites where you buy books. It'll cost a lot. Online comments, if perhaps anybody would want to comment. It's not going to take too long to read it, but I would recommend paying very close attention. Now, somebody said this was an anti-Masonic bit of work. It was certainly not, and I think Wolfgang Menzel may have been a Freemason himself. It's not an anti-Masonic bit of literature at all. It's anti-Illuminist, because he considered the order of the Illuminati to be a aberrant, an aberration of the principles of Freemasonry. Well, that was Menzel's opinion from reading this carefully. All right, so he's going on talking about the okay, Villafranca says, hey Ronald, here watching from Brownsville, Texas. Keep up them beer reviews. Thank you, Villafranca. Frederick Byron, is this a beer review? No, it's a reading of an excerpt from a book. And about a bishop that had gotten in trouble within the Holy Roman Empire. Now remember, in the 1700s, you had the Holy Roman Empire, the Heiliges Römische Reich of the German nation, The big countries of the Heiliges Römische Reich was Austria. The Dukes of Austria were almost always the Holy Roman Emperors by election. They were elected. Prussia was rising, though. Prussia was becoming the big within the empire. And eventually, the empire was destroyed by Napoleon Bonaparte, and it was reconstituted as the German Confederation in 1815. And that lasted until 1866, in which the German Third Reich tried to recreate the boundaries of the German Confederation, much to their detriment, as we know. So this is taking place during the First Reich, the Holy Roman Empire, the German nation. Then you remember they had the Second Reich, 1871 to 1918. That was the Hohenzollern dynasty under the leadership of Prussia, the Kingdom of Prussia. Mr. Tank says, hi, Ronald. Okay, so let's start reading. In the second, although misled by Wüllner and Bischofswerder to publish in 1788 edicts of censure, religious ordinances contrary to the spirit of the times and threatening to impede the progress of enlightenment, forcing them, and the French philosophy patronized by Frederick II continued to predominate auspices of the Duke of Brunswick, the Grand Master of Masonic lodges in Germany. The secret society of Freemasons had been in the commencement of this century spread from England over Germany and greatly promoted the progress of civilization. Okay, so this is telling you right there, there's not an anti-Masonic book. In England, the ancient corporation of stonemasons possibly been converted into a loyal club, loyal to the British monarchy, the House of Hanover, which no longer practiced architecture, but retained its symbols and elected a prince of the blood royal. Research Prince Philip today, Prince Philip of the House of Battenberg, husband of Queen Elizabeth of the House of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, popularly known as Windsor. That's another story there. After the execution of Charles I, member of England, Charles I of the House of Stuart, Ramsay, preceptor to the children of Charles II, during his exile, made use of the Scottish Masons in order to pave the way for the restoration of the Stuarts. Hiram, the builder of the Temple of Solomon, under whose mystical name the Savior, the builder of the Christian church, clearly understood was now supposed to represent Charles I and was honored as the murdered Charles I. They say Hiram represents the murdered master Charles I, as we know, was murdered by Oliver Cromwell and his evil counsel. The Jesuits played a principal part in this Scottish masonry, much that was Jesuitical to Masonry, Freemasonry, or the royal art. On the second fall of the Stuarts, that would be 1788, the new Hanoverian dynasty established an English Protestant lodge in opposition to that of Scotland and gave it as its principal symbol the letter G, George, in a sun. Freemasonry, now rapidly spread among the Protestants, gained a footing in Hamburg, 1733, and in Berlin, 1740, and ere long, before long, in our language today, became the center of civilization in its nobler and moral sense. Frederick II favored the society and became a member. The aim of this society was the erection of the invisible temple of humanity, symbols, the trowel, the square, the leather apron, were borrowed from the tools used in common masonry. The object promised but never attained by the church, the conferment of happiness on the human race by the practice of virtue and by fraternity, by the demolition of all the barriers that had hitherto separated nations, classes, and sects, was society labored. Now it's interesting that this author says the object promised but never attained by the church. The church never did if you study the history of the Catholic Church and the teachings of the, I'm just giving some commentary, teachings of the Catholic Church, they never promised, church never promised happiness on the human race by practice of virtue and fraternity and separation of class, sect, and national, that would be racial and ethnic barriers. No, the church taught that sin, under a burden of sin, until the second coming of Jesus Christ. Okay? Not by, not to say that the church opposed moral practice. So the author here is a little bit wrong, but let's go back to the text. Ronald says, same, see, thank you. In Germany, Freemason had ever, it was only in France that it became matter for speculation and vanity. And it was merely owing to the rage for imitating every French folly that French Freemasonry, with its theatrical terrors, its higher degrees sold to the credulous for solid gold, and its new rites of the self-denominated Templars. And a note down here says Freemasonry was alleged to have been first practiced by the ancient Templars. That's from Germany, Volume 3, Section 18. Intended as a bait to the nobility, gained a footing in Germany. So about this Freemasonry, French Freemasonry gained a foothold in Germany. That would be the ancient Orient, right? French Freemasonry. Adventurers of every description practiced upon the credulity of the rich and noble and defrauded them of their gold. And Cagliostro was the prince of impostors. The Society of Freemasons was prohibited by the Catholic states of southern Germany, where another secret society of a far more dangerous character was, however, formed. In the Protestant countries, the advance of civilization had been gradual. The seed had slowly ripened in the fostering bosom of futurity. I guess today's language we call it futurism or progressivism. But in Bavaria, one step was made from the ridiculous stories of Father Kochem, K-O-C-H-E-M, to the infidelity of Voltaire. And the rising generation, emancipating itself from the yoke of the Jesuits, instantly fell into the opposite extreme and attempted to annihilate by force not merely the church, positive religion. It was in this spirit that Professor Weishaupt in 1776 the Order of the Illuminati, to which he gave the old Jesuitical constitution. That is, the initiated took the oath of unconditional obedience to their secret superiors. This fanatical conspiracy against religion no sooner became known to the numerous freethinkers of northern Germany than they seditiously endeavored to enter into connection with it. The intervention of the notorious Baron von Knigge, K-N-I-G-G-E, Knigge, a Hanoverian adventurer noted for talent and depravity, the Illuminati became connected with the Freemasons, and by means of Nikolai, the Berlin bookseller, the editor of the Universal German Library, they had a public organ at once bold and wary. The Illuminati were, notwithstanding, decidedly antithetical to the great majority of Freemasons in northern Germany. Of Brunswick, in his quality as Grand Master, convoked all the German Freemasons to a great congress at Wilhelmsbad near Hanau in 1782. by which the contradictions that had hitherto, now 1782, remember that's still during the War of the American Revolution, by which the contradictions that had hitherto appeared in eclectic Freemasonry, as it was termed, were as far as possible removed. In the ensuing year, the Great Lodge of the Three Globes at Berlin discovered far greater energy by declaring every person who attempted to degrade Freemasonry to a society inimical to Christianity, incapable of becoming or of remaining a member. The Society of the Illuminati in Bavaria was 2 years later discovered and strictly persecuted. That's 1785. Weishaupt fled to Gotha, where he was protected by the Duke, Louis Ernest. Some of the members were imprisoned, deprived of their offices, etc. This also served as a lesson to the Freemasons, formed by the celebrated actor Schroeder in Hamburg, and Felsler, formerly a Capuchin, that would be a Catholic monk, in Berlin, by, on the one hand, checking the inclination to irreligion, on the other, by banishing display and superstition, and by restoring the ancient simple Anglican system. In a word, by regermanizing Gallicized Freemasonry. In other words, expunged the French radicalism and what this author considers deviancy from what he considers respectable German Freemasonry. This must be some weird beer review. No, it's not a beer review. Let him speak, says Xenophon. Yes, I agree. He's not insulting anyone, just speaking. Let him speak. I'm not insulting anyone. The Society of the Illuminati continued, meanwhile, to exist under the name of the German Union. And as a proof of its power, the innumerable satires published against Zimmermann in Hanover on his raising its mask may be induced. Uh-oh. That's where some of my family came from. Disregard what I just said. Okay, in Mayence, the coadjutor, the Archbishopric von Dahlberg, had established an academy which rivaled those of the Protestants. Here dwelt Forster, F-O-R-S-T-E-R. Here dwelt Forster, the celebrated discoverer, the witty Hinze, John Euler, the Swiss historian, etc. And it was here that Illuminatism took refuge. Dahlberg himself took the oath and entered the society under the name Cressens, C-R-E-S-C-E-N-S. Weishaupt was named Spartacus. Spartacus. Ooh. Kniga, Philo. Louis Ernest, Duke of Gotha. Ferdinand, Duke of Brunswick, who had refused entirely to renounce his connection with the Illuminati. Aaron, he adopted the name Aaron. Von dem Busch became Bayard. Bode, Emilius, Nikolai, Lucian, etc. The society was, however, first essentially raised in importance by its connection with Mirabeau, unprincipled French agent at Berlin and Brunswick. B-O-D-E, Bode, a privy councillor of the Duke of Weimar, Weishaupt's successor, and von dem Busch visited Paris, quote, for the purpose of illuminating France, unquote. Well, well, well. Philip, Duke of Orleans, Philip, Duke of Orleans, at the time Grand Master of the French lodges, received them with open arms. Their path had already long been smoothed by another German, von Holbach, a wealthy nobleman of the Pfalz, P-F-A-L-Z, Pfalz, who had formed a secret society of which Voltaire was the honorary president, and Diderot, the most active member, who dissipated his wealth in order to inundate the world with licentious and atheistical works. Let's think about that sentence for a minute. Something written in 1838. The world with licentious and atheistical works. Sound like he might have been successful, eh? He was the author of that scandalous work, Le Système de la Nature. Le Système de la Nature. The deadly hatred with which Philip of Orleans viewed the French king, whose throne he coveted. The condemnation of the revolutionary principles of the secret societies by Frederick the Great, and still more strongly by Frederick William. And finally, the deep resentment of the Illuminati on account of their persecution in Bavaria caused the society to rest its hopes on popular agitation. Aided by French Freemasonry, it spread the ideas of the liberty and equality of mankind, of the established universal republic, of the fall of royalty, and of the abolition of Christianity. The favorite saying of the Illuminati was, quote, "The last king ought to be hanged with the entrails of the last priest," unquote. These ideas, unable to take root in Germany, spread and rankled throughout France, the native soil to which they had returned. Okay, that should enlighten a lot, enlighten a lot of people with some back history of, let's say, the events of July 14th, 1789, the events of 1848, the events of the summer of 1914, the events of the revolution of 1917 in Russia, the events of 1933 to 1945, and establishment of certain international organizations in 1945, and so on and so on. So that's a good little thing. I'm glad I ran it off. I'm glad I made a copy, because you never know what'll happen to these documents. So that's just a simple reading of the text with a little commentary thrown in, but there's the text right there. Oh, don't we love to read about history? I certainly do. So thank you, Wolfgang Menzel, for talking about that. No, the book is not anti-Freemasonic. If it's anti-anything, if you read the book, if it's anti-anything, it would be anti-Semitic, because there's a lot of commentary about Germans being under the thrall of Jewish entities and whatnot. But that's another area in the book. I don't have that text. I don't have that. But anyway, so Menzel's Germany. Thank you for watching this video production, and I would be interested in your commentary. Oh, Xenophon says, what do you think of Fatima in Portugal? Oh, I think there was a very interesting apparition, a very important apparition 100 years ago. We know that 2 of the children were declared saints by the church this month, so that was important. You know, okay, so you have these proponents of evil, right, and wickedness in the world, right? But there's always the truth, the church, the Holy Church. There's a counterattack that because these attempts to set up this new world, this, like the book was talking about, like the excerpts were talking about all religion, and a world republic, a world government. People say today a world republic. We know that these have Luciferian roots. The roots are coming from satanic doctrines, which go back to well, the serpent in the garden. So you got to read every little bit, like the author saying that the church failed in its attempt to set up this paradise on earth. Well, that was never the teaching of the church. So you got to look at those things carefully. Teaching of the church was that God himself, God the Son, would return and establish a perfect world. But anyway, you know, we don't want to get too deep into this ongoing feud, if you want to call it that, this centuries-long feud between the forces of the way, the truth, and the life, the church, and the forces of the serpent in the garden. And he may bruise my heel, but she, the Virgin Mary that you were talking about at Fatima, will crush his head. Okay, so anyway, thank you very much, and everyone take care.